Shabbat Shalom, Mishpachah.
Shabbat Shalom.
Our parsha today is Vayeshev. And Danny, I'm not advancing for some reason. Let me turn it off and turn it back on and see. But I got batteries, but I'm not advancing. There we go. There we go. Vayeshev. As I was reading this and I was looking for a theme for today's message, through a roundabout way, my mind went to the Shema. And this came about after reading Joseph's interactions with his brothers. We read those scriptures earlier. It's a story that's familiar to all of us. Jacob especially loved his son Joseph. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his other sons because he was the son of his old age. So he had made him a long-sleeved tunic. The Tree of Life version translates Ketunet Pasim as long-sleeved tunic. This doesn't really have anything to do with our focus today, but it's interesting to me, and I've kind of felt that you wouldn't like it if I didn't explain to you why it doesn't say coat of many colors. Was that on your mind, some of you?
Yeah.
What happened to the coat?
Well, it turns out it's just a matter of interpretation.
Tunic.
The Septuagint and the Jewish Publication Society, along with several Christian Bibles, use coat of many colors. Then we find that a number of the ancient rabbis, as well as several Christian Bibles, plus the TLV, use long-sleeve tunic or something similar. And so it turns out that Ketunet Pasim is translated in several different ways. It can be a full-sleeve robe, a coat of many colors, a coat reaching to his feet, an ornamented tunic, a silk robe, or a fine woolen cloak. So take your pick. Whatever the coat was, it caused Joseph's brothers to be very, very jealous. And their jealousy led to much stronger emotions. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak to him in Shalom. So this is a story that's so familiar to us, and we can picture in our mind Joseph's dream about the sheaves of grain in the field and their sheaves bowing down to his sheaf, and then he told them about it. They said, "Will you truly be king over us?" His brothers said to him, "Will you really rule over us?" So they hated him even more because of his dreams and because of his words. And if we stop and think about that for a minute, just think about the emotion of hate. It's a very strong emotion. And it's an emotion that Adonai teaches us that we're not to have. Now we know that Joseph's brothers did not have the written Torah at this time, but the written Torah speaks very clearly about the sin that they just performed. You are not to hate your brother in your heart. So as we look at this, for our purposes today, I'm not thinking about so much their sin of hatred, but the possibility of sin in our hearts. And as I thought about love and hate, I looked for the opinions of some others, and you know we can go on the internet and get lots of opinions. But I asked specifically about the question, is hate the opposite of love? And the majority of their answers were that hate is not the opposite of love. I don't know if you've ever thought about that. But the majority opinion was that indifference is the opposite of love. Does that make sense to you? Indifference is the opposite of love. Well, this question brought to my mind our love for Adonai, and that thought brought me to the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And if we read this in Deuteronomy, we know that Moses was speaking for Adonai. And we are commanded to love Adonai with all our heart, soul, and strength. And then Yeshua confirmed this in the books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But the question for us individually today is, do we love Adonai in this way with all our heart, soul, and strength? And that's a question that only each of us can answer, and the only one that knows the answer is us and God. Well, here's another question to consider. Is love an emotion or an action, or both? If we took a vote, I think we would probably all say it's both, right? Would you not agree?
I agree.
But then we have the question, how much of each one of these is enough? How much emotional love and how much action love? And we know that Adonai does not force us to love him. He only wants our love when we give it to him freely. So the question is, how are we to love Adonai? How do we go about loving Adonai? Well, the answer is found in Torah. A group of Pharisees wanted to test Yeshua, and one of them asked him this question: Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the Torah? And he said to him, you shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. We say that every week and as a part of our service. But if you look in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you find that the Shema is presented in slightly different ways in each one of these books. But it's only here in Matthew that Yeshua tells us how we are to carry these commandments out. And this is something which we've already said here today. He said the entire Torah and the prophets hang on these two commandments. In other words, the answer as to how we are to love Adonai and our neighbor is found in the Torah and in the prophets. But in order to know and to understand what is in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, depends upon us. We have to study it in order to understand Yeshua's words about the Torah and prophets. And Shaul confirms this to us. Make every effort to present yourself before God as tried and true, as an unashamed worker cutting a straight path with the word of truth. The word, what is the word of truth? It's all of Scripture. And it is not optional for us to study it. You may say, well, I'm happy just the way I am, and just let them open up my ear and pour it in at the service, and that's all I need. But that's not what Yeshua is asking us to do. As workers, we are Talmudim, we are disciples, workers that are seeking the word of truth. That's a mission for each one of us as a disciple of Yeshua. Well, the next question that comes up is, how well are we doing as Yeshua's disciples? And when I ask this question, it is as much or more for me than it is for you. It's a question I ask myself all the time. Overall, I'm not sure how I measure up as a disciple. I know I fail in a lot of ways. But I want to be a successful disciple. And all of us should be asking ourselves the same question. How are we progressing as a disciple of Yeshua? Now, I've devised a practical way to illustrate our level of discipleship. I have devised a talmidometer. Did you get that?
Yeah.
A talmidometer. A meter which measures where we are as Yeshua's disciple. Now, don't... Just lost my
Battery
battery.
fell out.
I got it. That's what happens when you try to be a comedian. See if I can get these back in here right. I got them. Thank you.
Now the thing went off.
As I said, I'm being serious.
The screen went off.
There.
Back on, okay.
There we go.
We all need to look at ourselves critically with some kind of measure in mind. So here's the talmidometer. Or you could call it a disciple meter if you want to. Now, if you look at it, you see at the bottom is the point of salvation. And then at some point, we get a bottle, a baby bottle with a nipple on it. And we're drinking milk. Now, if you're in my generation of people, we got pablum. I don't know if they still do pablum. But pablum, you know, if an adult tastes it, it's the most blah thing you ever tasted, but it's just a real gooey kind of cereal that babies used to eat. I guess they still do. And going up the scale, you see then a soft meat diet, and finally an adult diet. So we're somewhere on that scale, and each one of us needs to look and see where we are. You all know what the scripture says. If we're on milk, we're still an infant disciple. For although you ought to be teachers by this time, you need someone to teach you the basics of God's sayings. You have come to need milk, not solid food. For anyone living on milk is inexperienced with the teaching about righteousness. He is an infant. The teaching about righteousness is what we're going to be talking a lot about today. But solid food is for the mature who through practice have their senses trained to discern both good and evil. As I look at that scripture, I believe that the writer of Hebrews is telling us that if we have been Yeshua's disciples for some time, for a good while, whether or not we are called to be a teacher, because we know everyone's not, we are still expected to obtain that level of scripture knowledge. Would you agree with that? Mm-hmm. If it's only for ourselves, we are expected to do it. And then secondly, he speaks about teaching about righteousness, which brings up another question. What is righteousness? One definition that we frequently see is right standing with God. In a general sense of way, I think that is a good definition, but there's more to it. Well, how do we obtain right standing with Adonai? For the Talmid, the male disciple, or the Talmidah, the female disciple, who is earnestly seeking Adonai, the answers are available to us. So we'll pick a point and we'll begin here. Shaul tells us this: "For I'm not ashamed of the good news, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who trusts, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. In it the righteousness of God is revealed from trust to trust, as it is written, but the righteous shall live by emunah." So Shaul speaks first about the Besorah, the tidings, the good news of Yeshua HaMashiach. This is the news about the salvation available through Yeshua, but it is also the news of his eternal kingdom. The full title there is Besharat Hagulah HaMalchut, the good news of redemption of the kingdom of Yeshua HaMashiach. And it was given first to the Jews, but it's equally available to the Gentiles. In the story of the good news, Adonai's way of making persons righteous is revealed. Excuse me. The Tree of Life version says that it is from trust to trust. It's a little hard to understand. I think that the Complete Jewish Bible explains this particular point better, and it says from beginning to end. And this means that we must maintain our trust, we must maintain our faith from the initial moment that we trust Yeshua until either our death or Yeshua's return, whichever comes first, from beginning to end. This statement about maintaining our faith from beginning to end is a clue. It's a clue that faith is not just an act of emotion, but is something more. Now, if we look for traditional definitions of faith, here's what we get. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary says, belief and trust in God, loyalty to God, belief in the traditional doctrines of a religion, firm belief in something for which there is no proof, or complete trust. But Shaul gives us the answer in the scripture which we just read. As it is written, but the righteous shall live by emunah. The underlying Greek word here is pistis, P-I-S-T-I-S. Well, the question is, how can the Tree of Life version translate it as emunah? They can do it because Shaul is quoting Habakkuk 2:4 in the Tanakh. And the word that the prophet used is emunah. Going to the Strong's Dictionary, emunah means steadfastness, firmness, or fidelity. And so if we combine that with what we've already said, faith has the meaning of belief, but there's an equally important meaning of faithfulness. But to be completely fair, the Greek word pistis also has the meaning of faith and faithfulness. But the faithfulness part, unfortunately, is not taught very often. So what we have is faith, belief, and faithfulness as both being necessary. And after we believe, after we trust in Yeshua, we must continue to walk faithfully all of our lives. Not fire insurance. You can't go say, Yeshua, I trust you, Jesus, I trust you, and live like hell, as the old saying goes. It won't get you there. So once you trust, you start on your path to becoming a disciple, and you walk faithfully all your life. We have learned just now, you already knew it, of course, that when you trust Yeshua and are saved, we complete the first part of the concept of righteousness before Adonai. That's how you complete the first part. where do we go from here? Is there something else necessary? And the answer is yes. And if we go back, it's found in the Shema, and the most important commandment according to Yeshua. We must do our best to obey this commandment. That is to love Adonai with all of our heart, mind, and soul. And our salvation, our trust in Yeshua is a part of that love that we have for Adonai. But loving Adonai also has to do with being obedient to him. Moses said, "It will be righteousness to us if we take care to do all this commandment before Adonai our God, just as he has commanded us." And Adonai's Torah is for us. That is, if you have accepted this Holocaust, this way of walking out Scripture. We're not teaching this to the church. They are responsible for the Holocaust taught by their own leaders. But for us, Shaul confirms our Holocaust. For it is not the hearers of Torah who are righteous before God. Rather, it is the doers of Torah who will be justified. That's pretty plain, isn't it? How do people miss that? How do they miss it? I'm going to read it to you again from the New International Version just to make sure that I wasn't trying to slip something past you. It says basically the same thing. For it is not those who hear the law who are righteous in God's sight, but it is those who obey the law who will be declared righteous. So to be righteous is to follow Adonai's commandments according to the letter and the spirit in which they were taught by Moses and then upheld by Yeshua. Because Yeshua said, "Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others the same shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever keeps and teaches them, this one shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven." Now in Yeshua's day, there were many more commandments in Torah which were expected to be obeyed. They had a temple, and the people that he was talking to lived in the land of Israel. But for us today, they have been reduced by more than 2/3 by the destruction of the temple, and also the fact that we're not physically living in Israel. So the question is, which commandments have been rendered unavailable to those of us in the diaspora, the dispersion, those of us living outside Israel? Do you know? I would say to you, it is the task of a disciple to find out. So it's our job to examine ourselves. Actually, we must judge ourselves. I can only judge my own position before Adonai, not anyone else's. But we must be honest with ourselves about our level of discipleship. Are we too satisfied with our status quo? That is where we are right now as Yeshua's disciples. If we are serious disciples, we must go beyond just the minimum. For if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he is fooling himself. Rather, let each one examine his own work. Then he will have pride in himself alone and not in comparison to anyone else. We are not being compared to each other. We are not being compared to anyone else with regard to our level of discipleship. But each one of us must examine where we are today, right now. Going back to our earlier question, what is the opposite of love? And I think that we can conclude that it is indifference. It is not caring. It is not returning love given either by a mate or, in our study today, love given by Adonai. Do we return love to him in the ways that we have seen that we can love him? Do we return the love which Adonai and Yeshua give us? I think the answer is yes, we do. We do. We actually do. But we can always do better. And that's the major point here. We can always do better. So a next step is for us to be brutally honest with ourselves about our level of commitment. If you read in Philippians 3, Shaul is speaking about his ultimate personal goal being resurrection from the dead. It was something which he saw in the spirit as happening in the future. But while he was a living being on earth, this is what he said. This was his goal. Not that I have already obtained this or been perfected, but I press on, if only I might take hold of that for which Messiah took hold of me. Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself as having taken hold of this, but this one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead. I press on to the goal, or as some versions say, the high calling, for the reward of the upward calling of God in Messiah Yeshua. Therefore, let all who are mature have this attitude. And if you have a different attitude in anything, this also God will reveal to you. There it is right there. Examine yourselves, examine ourselves, and let Adonai reveal to us where we are. So I want to, and I ask you to do the same thing. Let's make Shaul's goal to be our goal. The goal for each one of us here in Beit Shalom. That we would press on toward the goal for the upward reward of the upward calling of God in Messiah Yeshua. I'm not your judge, but I am your cheerleader. I'm your cheerleader. And I exhort you to consult your Talmidometer. Each of us should want to move to a higher level of discipleship. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.